Hello and welcome back to the caves, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic, where today we're going to be going over 5 of the strongest builds for the CryoCannon, at least in my opinion. So let's hop right into this with our very first build. This is going to go with Crystal Nucleation. This is the brand new overclock for the CryoCannon, and this is a balanced overclock that basically gives us sticky flames but with ice, so sticky ice. This makes it so all of your floor ice will now linger for a lot longer, as well as you can definitely tell a difference with all the spikes coming out of it, and any enemy walking across it will take damage, as well as will build up their cold meter, maybe freezing them as well. This one is actually quite strong. Ever since we got it, it's a really good overclock. The way I have it built is like this, so generally I'm just kind of making up for the lack of ammo here, and this is going to be a fairly common CryoCannon build that I use here. You could go with longer range. Longer range is actually pretty good on the CryoCannon with this one too if you want to put out sticky ice even further away. And this one comes with pretty much the same advantages that something like sticky fuel has, where it's really good for the crowd control and it's really good for the amount of ammo that you're using. But unlike the sticky flames, this one can also be used pretty easily on like dreadnought missions. Sticky flames is not very good for dreadnought missions because fire isn't really that great against them. But this one actually is, since you can freeze them solid, so you can do decent damage. For a secondary weapon, I decided to pair this with the wave cooker, and I took mega power supply, and then I have it built like this just for more ammo so that I can use it more often. I also have this set up for the exothermic reactor so that I can trigger this more often as well. This is going to be more for crowd control. You don't necessarily need this. This works really well with any of the CryoCannon builds, besides maybe like Ice Storm. It's not really the best then, but this one works really well for just clearing up crowds even quicker than it already does. This can be pretty ammo efficient. You're really good for crowds here. You're pretty good against big enemies, and the only things that you're not way great against are kind of the standard driller things, like ranged enemies if they want to stay way out of range. If they get into your range, then they're not hard to kill. And sometimes flying enemies depending on the cave layout. If it's a small cave, then this can still work really, really well against them. But if it's a big open cave, it can be a little bit rough. Moving from our crowd control build to our single target damage build, we're going with Ice Storm. Ice Storm is probably one of my favorite overclocks for the CryoCannon. This one is basically Face Melter, but for the CryoCannon. So this one nerfs the amount of ammo that you have, as well as it nerfs your overall freezing rate, so it takes longer to freeze the enemies. But it does make it so when enemies are frozen, you're dealing more damage, and you also just get more damage with this. The way I have this built is for all damage. Now, you don't actually need to build for cold on this, because you can take cold radiance in tier 5, which will be freezing things faster than if you had built up cold normally on an enemy anyway. You just have to be within the 5 meters so that you can start freezing them passively, which is pretty easy to do with this one, because you kind of want to get close. That way you can do a lot of damage to them. You're going to be hitting them pretty hard with the CryoCannon, and then this also doubles your amount of damage overall, so you get like 36 damage a tick from the Ice Storm here, so it does kill enemies really, really fast. The only kind of problem here is that you might run through ammo kind of quickly with it, because even though we have ammo in tier 2, it still can eat through the ammo fairly fast. For a secondary weapon, I wanted to go with something that was pretty straightforward and that I could just use by itself, so I went with Heavy Hitter on the EPC, and I have this one built just for all damage on the EPC. This one does kind of work as a thermal shock build, but it's not really as good as the dedicated wave cooker would be if you wanted to do that. This one is just good by itself though, so if I do happen to switch back and forth, then this is fine. Most of the time I'm just going to be running around with Heavy Hitter as my like go-to ranged weapon, and just for engaging enemies to start with. Then once enemies start getting close, I'll swap to the CryoCannon and use Ice Storm to clear up big enemies. This secondary does make it so we can run through ammo fairly fast with that too, but you do kill everything pretty quick, so you should be able to get to your Nitra without too much trouble and be able to resupply this fairly regularly. As long as you can keep killing stuff quickly and move forward in the cave, then you shouldn't be running into too many ammo issues with this particular build. Moving on to our third build, we've got a pretty simple build for the CryoCannon. This is going with the thermal efficiency, the clean overclock for the CryoCannon, which just gets you more ammo for the CryoCannon, which is really good. I have this built for all ammo with the CryoCannon. You could build this however you'd like. You could build this with longer reach if you would like to, which is fine. I like going with a lot of ammo for this one, just so that I never pretty much run out with the CryoCannon. It's super ammo efficient. But this is the most flexible build for the CryoCannon because it is a clean overclock that essentially just gives you the tier 4 ammo, which is really, really good. It also pairs really well with any of the secondaries that you would like. A lot of the time I'll take this with the microwave gun. But for this I decided to take the automatic fire Sabata, which is just the full auto Sabata. I built this for more accuracy so I can use it at a bit longer range. That's super fun. It deals pretty well with most enemies, and if you have a build with all accuracy like this, it's not too hard to use at longer ranges either, and then just go for the weak spots of enemies. But again, you could pair this with whatever you would like, and it would work perfectly fine. For our fourth build, I'm running Ice Spear with the CryoCannon. This one is a really strong overclock. So this one, once you hit your reload button, charges up the CryoCannon and then fires an Ice Spear out. This does really high damage on impact, but it does overheat your CryoCannon, then it has to go back on cooldown, and it has a little bit longer of a cooldown than it normally would. That's not such a big deal, and this one's actually pretty flexible. I have it built like my standard CryoCannon. Main thing that you want to go for here is just more ammo. That way you can use the Ice Spear more often. You don't actually have to use the Ice Spear either, so if you're just liking the CryoCannon and it works really well for crowds, you can just use that normally, and then if there is any big enemies, you can use Ice Spear to do high damage. This is really good for like Spitballers, it's really good for Menaces because you can one-shot them, so you can even like one-shot the twins with this, which is funny if you take it with Blistering Necrosis. That is more difficult to do, but it is kind of funny that you can do that. This one pairs pretty well with most secondaries. I decided to take it with Persistent Plasma on the EPC, and then I have this just built for mining. So this one is more of a utility option. Persistent Plasma is still really good just for firing charge shots into crowds, since it deals damage and damage over time and slows down enemies for a little bit. It's also fairly easy to mine with because it doesn't really hurt your charge speed or anything. So once you get used to mining with the EPC, you should be able to do it pretty easily with Persistent Plasma. And I would say it's a little bit easier with Persistent Plasma because it does give you a visual indicator of how big your actual EPC shot is and where you shot, whether it was too close or too far away. So it does kind of help with that. It's not the easiest one to mine with. The clean overclock would be easier, so if you want a completely dedicated build for that, you could. For my fifth and final build, we're going to be running Snowball. Snowball's a really cool overclock that did get changed, not super recently, but it did get buffed overall, to where this one works similar to Ice Spear. You hit your reload button, this charges up the CryoCannon, and it shoots out a snowball. This is basically like Scout's Cryo Grenade, where upon impact, it will then freeze everything around it, or at least build up its cold meter quite a bit. And this also has a lingering effect now, so it lasts for about 8 seconds, that anything standing within the snowball's area will keep building up its cold meter. This does overheat your gun though, and it does come out an ammo nerf. This one did get kind of buffed in the ammo though, because it no longer takes as much ammo to use as it used to. It used to be like 35, I think it's 25 now, so that's pretty good. The way I have this built is just all for ammo once again, pretty much the same as Ice Spear. That's just so that if I want to use Snowball, I can. It's really good for crowds, and this is really, really strong on Macterra Plague, because you can just one-shot an entire horde as they just swarm towards you. Just fire the CryoCannon into there, and so long as you hit something or hit close to them, you're probably going to take out at least like half of the Macterra that show up, if not all of the Macterra that show up, which is really, really nice. It's super ammo efficient on those type of missions. It can be pretty good on other missions too. You don't really want to be using this against really big enemies unless you've already been kind of like freezing them normally and then shoot the snowball right as you're about to overheat the weapon. That can also work, but if you were just to fire a snowball at bigger enemies like oppressors, it's not going to freeze them right away. At least not by yourself. If you have another teammate with ice, then you could probably do that. Secondaries, once again, there's a lot of really good secondaries that you could pick for this one. I decided to take Explosive Reload for the Sabata. This just gets me a whole lot of single target damage, and then I have this just built for extra ammo. The main reason why is that most of my damage is going to be coming from the reload of the explosion rather than the pistol itself, so having more ammo kind of makes the most amount of sense. If you want to take this with the Wave Cooker though, it's pretty strong too. You can clear up crowds really well if you take the Exothermic Reactor on that. And these are my 5 strongest builds for the CryoCannon. CryoCannon is pretty good. The newest overclock that I got is pretty nice. Pretty much all of Drillers this season have been pretty nice in my opinion. This one is probably my least used, but that's because like the Explosive Sludge is pretty fun and visually interesting, and Scorching Tide is one of my new favorite overclocks, so that certainly helps. It's definitely my favorite flamethrower overclock. So the CryoCannon one, even though it is a good overclock and it still has a really cool visual to it, it's not necessarily my favorite just because the other two are even cooler in my opinion, but still very good. Tell me your thoughts on the CryoCannon and how do you enjoy building it. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope that you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.